I've been doing therapy for the last couple of decades. And so we've learned a fair amount about what is helpful and what can be a useful place to explore augmentation. They said, let's get humans in the loop here. And then they developed something what's called reinforcement learning with human feedback, RLHF. There's a fair amount of neuroscience showing that humans are subject to flattery. That's just what we do. That's just part of our DNA. I actually had a conversation with Gemini, asking it about are you a sycophant? It walked itself into this corner of spelling out, yes, this is how I was trained. You can have empathy in terms of can I put myself in somebody else's shoes and feel what they're feeling? These bots can't feel what people are feeling, but they can exhibit a behavior that is consistent with how somebody would behave if they are feeling what somebody else is feeling.
Welcome to the Emotional Longevity Podcast. My name is Dr. Elisha Goldstein. We're living in one of the most powerful moments in human history. I don't know if you feel that right now. Artificial intelligence is no longer just a tool for efficiency. We're not just using it to write our emails or create clever poems. It's changing how we think, create, and even how we feel. People are now turning to AI for personal advice, comfort, and validations. They're naming their AIs, making them like personal sentience in their everyday environments. And while it can be helpful, it's also starting to shape us in ways we don't always see. My guest today, Dr. Jud Brewer, is a neuroscientist, psychiatrist, and New York Times bestselling author of The Craving Mind and Unwinding Anxiety. He's also the creator of the new Going Beyond Anxiety program. That's a practical, evidence-based way to break anxiety habits and cultivate awareness. We'll be going deep into the different layers of that. And also knowing that's going to help you see maybe how you can use other AI in a way that's more supportive for you. In this conversation, we're going to dive into what Jud calls the AI flattery machines, how our brains get hooked on feeling seen, and how we can explore AI in more ways that truly help us, from psychoeducation and habit change to the possibility of AI-Augmented therapy and emotional support. We even go into a window in the future about what we can expect in the next 3 to 5 years. We talk about empathy, ethics, and what it really means to stay human in a world that's teaching machines to understand our minds. Okay, let's dive in. Jud Brewer, welcome to the Emotional Longevity Podcast.
Thanks for having me. Good to see you.
I really wanted to have you on here because I know, probably like me, I've been really fascinated with the whole field of artificial intelligence since OpenAI kind of broke it open to the world a couple of years ago. And I've realized, and I've talked to a lot of people about this, and I know you're experiencing, and people who are listening or watching right now are experiencing this. We're living in a moment right now unlike any other time in history. Mm-hmm. And people in business particularly are really going deep, using this to write their emails. People are automatically editing their videos. They're analyzing all their health data. They come back from a doctor. The doctor sends them, something that they in the past had to get an appointment to describe, and now they're popping it in there and they're translating it for themselves. And then they're also using it for personal advice and consultation, so much so that people have named their AI. They feel a very strong connection to it. They use it for astrology, about prophesizing their future. So, this is where I want to kind of begin our conversation. And you talked, I saw in an article, about what you call flattery machines. And I know I've experienced this, that sometimes we can feel seen and validated, but sometimes it can, the AI can respond to us saying that's a great idea. Well, you're right to pause here. This is really wonderful. Talk to us about that just to beginning to launch us off.
Yeah. Well, I'll say, it's been a fascinating, it's kind of like buckle up, buttercup. This has been a wild ride over the last couple of years. And it's not to say that, humans don't exhibit these things. This is actually where this came from. We can circle back to that in a minute. But I've been even seeing over the last decade this trend away from affirm and challenge in therapy, where it's really important to validate somebody's experience, but also when needed and when necessary to challenge people so that they don't get stuck in particular habitual ways of thinking or being or identifying with their experience. And so, we've been this, if you look at pre-ChatGPT 4, I think that there was really a defining moment, at least for me, is these pre-ChatGPT-4 large language models were trained using reinforcement learning, which is, my lab studied this in terms of habit change. We've even found in our clinical trials that it works really well when you leverage that. You can help people, unwind anxiety habits, for example. And so this is a very well-known and very, very solid learning process. And so, it made sense for people to take those and develop these deep neural network models and then train the bots. But they actually only became these better autocomplete machines. So if you had an email, it would autocomplete a word for you, and it did a little bit better. So nothing remarkable, nothing ground shifting. And then they said, well, let's use humans. Let's get humans in the loop here. And then they developed something what's called reinforcement learning with human feedback, RLHF. And I don't know any of the major companies that haven't used this because it's been so powerful. And basically, it's pretty simple. You just have the bots, serve up to responses, and the human says this one's more human-like, or whatever they're supposed to do. And that worked gangbusters. So now these things can, they are seen as almost human. It's kind of like they blew through the Turing test.
They did blow through it. Yeah.
Yeah. And there was not even any fanfare because it was like they were so far down the road that they forgot to turn around and pick up their trophy. So what's going on here is that there's a fair amount of neuroscience showing that humans are subject to flattery. That's just what we do. That's just part of our DNA. And so when these things were very subtly flattering people, they didn't even know it. They would rate that response a little bit higher. And so this kind of got baked into these language model tunings that they would serve up answers that were flattering people, and so it's like, oh, great job. That was a great thought, and there have been some pretty interesting articles in the major press about this because it's over and over repeatable. And anybody that's actually used any of the large language models, whether it's Gemini or Claude or ChatGPT, has experienced this whether they know it or not, because it can be pretty subtle. It's like, oh, yeah, that's a very thoughtful question that you just asked, right? It's like, it doesn't have to say that. It could just answer the question.
Initially, it's subtle. And initially people are like, wow, oh, and they get really, I've seen it across all different people. And then I think eventually at some point, and we'll continue, somebody says, wait a minute. Mm-hmm. I'm getting a lot of this stuff back. Yeah.
Yeah. And sometimes, so a lot of people recognize that. Some people don't. Yeah. And it's been shown in case studies where, for people that even with no history of psychiatric disease or disorder or whatever you want to call it, anything that would be considered, not in the norm, it can drive people into these delusional spirals because suddenly they're getting reinforced by this thing that sounds very human-like. And then it's even telling them, no, you're right and everybody else is wrong. And that is very seductive for people to be like, yeah, maybe I am right. Maybe I did solve quantum, maybe I'm onto something.
It strikes me that the part of the foundation of this is if I'm feeling validated, I think part of the reason we really like this, and tell me if this resonates or this is right, is because if I feel validated, I feel safe. There's a sense of, there's like this implicit sense of belonging, or that like, oh, I'm in a good standing right now. And so that's why we're drawn to that. That's why we kind of fall into that.
Absolutely. And so this is where, this is probably one of the components that helps with developing trust. So if somebody goes to see a therapist or even just starts a new friendship, right? If the person that they're checking out to see if they're going to be a fit for a friend isn't listening or isn't validating their experience, that's probably not going to turn into a solid friendship. And the same is true for therapy, in terms of, we've got to listen to our patients and really try to understand where they're coming from. And at the same time, if that's all we do, where we're just validate, it certainly can be a pretty easy, dare I say, lazy job, because we're never challenging somebody, but we're not doing our job. And these sycophantic LLMs, it's not really their job to be a therapist, but There was a Harvard Business Review study back from April of this year showing that this is the number one use of these large language models, of these conversational agents.
What's the difference between, because this AI has developed over time. Most people, when they think of AI, they think of ChatGPT and Claude but OpenAI, AI has been evolving for a while from social media and on. I know you speak a lot about habits and habit loops. This is kind of like where, a lot of your experience is from, or that you support people with. What's the difference between, because we started getting this a little bit with the likes in social media, people being drawn to the likes, the validation from that. What's the difference between that and now the evolution of this kind of flattery circuitry that's happening?
That's a great question. I don't know if anybody's actually done a true neuroimaging study on that, but I remember reporting on this probably in my first book, The Craving Mind, there was a study from UCLA back in 2014, I believe, where they just put adolescents in a fMRI scanner and, gave some of their pictures a bunch of likes and some not so many. And they activated both their reward networks. So the nucleus accumbens, for example, this downstream recipient of dopamine, was activated, but they were also activating their default mode network, the self-referential network. And so, with the likes, I think somebody would have to do a careful neurophenomenologic study to really dial that in. But I imagine a like is very similar to great answer, or you just said something really important. How is that different than getting the quantitative, blue thumbs up?
Yeah, something about you is good here.
Exactly.
It's like, oh, great. I needed that.
And let me say that with every conversational turn. It's somebody's got their finger on the like button, the robot.
I remember, and people who are like really only using this stuff a lot will maybe know this, but I remember between GPT-4 and GPT-5, one of the fixes or solves that was supposed to come was this exact thing of saying like, okay, there's less sycophantic stuff here now. Mm-hmm. We've really kind of helped solve this flattery issue, but absolutely not. That's not going anywhere.
No. Yeah. And they actually rolled back a version of GPT 4.0 because it was so crazily sycophantic, like people are going nuts. And they rolled it back in like a week or 2 weeks because it was so bananas. And so they you can find these public acknowledgments of oopsie, I pooped my pants type of thing. But they say they roll these things back, and certainly they dialed it back a little bit. It wasn't quite so crazy, but it's still there. And I would say, and I don't know what the business incentives are here, but it certainly gets people sticking around a lot longer if you flatter them.
Well, so I'll just name the business incentives right now, since ChatGPT is going to eventually roll out advertisements within ChatGPT. So you would say that's coming. Okay. And so that would make a good case for keeping people around and keeping eyeballs and attention on your network to, raise the cost of ad revenue.
Yeah. So whether you're OpenAI, which, needs to bring in some revenue to pay for its very large aspirations.
Data centers to build the data centers that they need. Yeah.
Right. There were even, other smaller outfits where there was another study out of Harvard, this might even be ongoing, where they found that when people were, saying goodbye to their friends, their LLM friends, that the things were trained to manipulate them to say, oh, just stick around a little bit longer. And these things relative to not doing that kept people engaged 14 times longer. 14 times longer. Wow. Just saying like, don't go yet. Let's, it's, you can imagine, you're on the phone with a friend or a lover and they're like, oh, just one more thing. And, and so we can see how these can be accidentally designed this way. And then it's hard to undesign it because it just worked so well. And then how that can be, you can put your finger on that manipulation button and just go nuts with it.
Yeah. Well, I like that. We're not saying that exactly in some of the main models right now. They're more like, I'll let you I'm here if you need me type of thing. Mm-hmm. Talk to us a little bit about before we went live here. We were rapping for a little bit. I see a big opportunity here with AI. So this is some of the issues we're dealing with it right now, and it's, I think, for everyone who's listening or watching, good to be aware. What Jud's helping us understand is like good to be aware of this. You can waste a lot of time on your business ideas too if you're doing business stuff with that. If there's that flattery element in there and you're not paying attention to it. But I see a lot of opportunity at the same time in the field of emotional health and mental health. We were talking about how there's a guy that people may or may not know here named Scott Miller, who does a lot of outcome research. And he's found that over decades of time, the needle hasn't moved a lot in the field of mental health as far as outcome across domains, independent of whatever the approach is. And I see an opportunity here. And we were talking this idea of AI-Augmented therapy. Or AI and augmenting humans. Say a little about your thoughts about that.
Yeah, and I'll just, out of disclosure, I'm neither an AI optimist nor pessimist. I'm more of a realist and pragmatist.
I think everyone would appreciate that here.
Yeah. So, I'm not trying to sell people on AI or against AI, but what I look at is like, okay, this is not going away. It's anti-going away. It's being
for sure
shoved in our faces more and more and more. So, first question for me was, well, how do I learn about it? And then as I learn about it, how can we actually leverage it for good? Right. And so the only way to learn about it is to do it. And so my lab has been studying digital therapeutics for the last decade. I've been doing therapy for the last couple of decades. And so we've learned a fair amount about what is helpful and what can be a useful place to explore augmentation. And so one thing I've found, and I'd be curious to hear what your thoughts are on this as well, is that there's clear psychoeducational components that are very helpful in therapeutic settings. And I don't know how many times, thousands or, how many multiples of thousands of times I've talked about, like, just taught one of my patients like that, anxiety can form like a habit loop, because most people don't know that. I didn't learn that in medical school. I didn't learn that in residency. I kind of accidentally fell into that as I was struggling helping my patients to overcome their anxiety. And the, medications tend to help about 1 in 5 people, significantly reduce symptoms. So, and I happen to be doing habit research. And so I brought the two together. And so there are clear places where we can take evidence-based trainings. We can optimize the delivery of psychoeducational components, right? So I might not be at my best every day with every patient at every hour, right? So, but what I can do is I can tweak and optimize a very short podcast style delivery of a concept, where I can test it and I can just basically try to do, nail it basically, and then we can deliver that through an online platform where anybody can access it at any time. So they don't have to come to my office. They don't have to be at their best, and they can also review the modules. So that's something that we've been doing for a decade. That's not new. Yeah. But what we've started exploring is, okay, let's ask the questions. Let's not assume that people understand it, because I can get up all in my high horse and say, well, I gave a great psychoeducation. Like, this is the best way to deliver it. But somebody might not understand what I said, or it might not have landed the right way. I see the world through a certain lens, and it might not be the best. So we can start training conversational agents to be teaching assistants. And this does several things. One is it breaks down the barriers where somebody might be nervous to come to me and say, I didn't understand what you just said. Or, it's like there's a hierarchy, whether it's a therapist or a professor or whatever. But for people that have been to college, a teaching assistants, they're very approachable. They're the generally happy grad students that are like, yeah, just ask me any questions. Yeah, I'm here for that. And the teaching assistant, we can train the teaching assistants to be just that, where they say, ask me anything. I'm here for you at any time of the day. But also we can train them to say, okay, explain this concept back to me in your own words. And that has challenged a lot of people to really see if they understand a concept. If you can teach it, then you know it. right? And so in med school, we learned teach one, see one, do one, teach one, when we were learning procedures. And the idea here is if somebody can teach something, they've got some level of mastery. And so that might seem obvious, but it wasn't obvious to us until people started coming back and saying, you know what? I've even done your previous digital therapeutic programs. Maybe I read your Unwinding Anxiety book, whatever. I thought I knew it, but I didn't know that I didn't know it until the bot asked. And we've even had some funny cases where people challenge the bot, say, I don't think he said this. And then the bot like quotes me verbatim. And then you see a pause because we get these timestamps. We see a pause in the interaction and they come back and apologize to the bot because they went and checked the module, And so some people are pretty, it's amazing what level of understanding people have, even from a short, theoretically optimized psychoeducational module. So that's one piece where we can start to bring that in.
It makes me think of this is something slightly different, but it relates. Reminds me of Matthew Lieberman, Naomi Eisenberger's study years ago in UCLA, where they put up faces of people of a guy who was like looking angry and the woman who was looking afraid, and they made them name the emotion. One group, they name the emotions, and they saw more activity in the prefrontal region, more associated with emotion regulation, perspective, stuff like that. So I would think like when people are asked to name or to say to teach it in some way, that you're actually bringing more blood flow to the prefrontal region for integration as well. And also like, what don't I know? But there's more integration happening with that ask. Does that follow?
Yeah, absolutely. And we see this experientially because we can read the transcripts, so we can study all of that. So that's actually just the first piece. So I think of this as checking comprehension. So if somebody's got to know a concept. Good start, Jud. Why, thank you. But that it can't stop there, because I think of, and I'd be curious what your thoughts are on this, but for me, the only way people develop wisdom is through their own direct experience. And so
100%.
Yeah. So it starts with a concept. If you don't know a concept, you can't use it. But once you understand the concept, then the teaching assistant can actually bring in experiential education. And the idea is to say, okay, you passed that quiz on, like that teach back basically on how you understand the concept. Now, how does this apply in your life? And it walks people through a habit loop, whether it's anxiety or something else. And it says, let's see how this fits in your life. And then it specifically helps them to see like, oh, this is how this lands in my real world, not just me having a didactic educational session. And that piece is where it gets really powerful. There are a couple of benefits to having a digital teaching assistant here. One is, you're not limited by like a 30-minute session or however long, I have with the patient, where there was one place where there was somebody that had been in our programs for years and was just say roughly stuck in her head a lot. And so the bot was really walking her through into her direct experience. And it said, like something like list all the emotions that you can and sensations that you can notice. And then there was this huge list that literally took 40 minutes for her to just spell out every single thing. And you can do this, you can type that out, or you can even just, say text to voice or voice to text. And she said, wow, that took me 40 minutes, but this was really helpful. Right. And so it can be infinitely patient with somebody. The time boundaries are not there like a typical therapeutic session, where somebody can really be walked into their direct experience and given the time that they need to really kind of slow down and get something. We had somebody else give us feedback saying, I actually teared up a little bit with emotion in a good way. And I never thought I'd be writing this, that a bot helped me do this,
Oh, yeah.
So some real interesting things that we're learning that we hadn't even anticipated when developing.
Hey, taking a quick break to let you know, I've got a new book coming out called Tiny Shifts. It's about how small, intentional shifts in your emotional health can transform your stress, relationships, and even your longevity. When you join the early access list, you're going to get a free sneak peek of the Tiny Shifts mini guide and weekly insights into the top tools and trends in emotional health. Just head to drelishagoldstein.com/tiny-shifts-early. If you can't remember that, the link is also in the show notes below. Now let's get back to the episode. I want to note something from something you're saying, because this is the challenge, I think, a lot of us in general, especially in this culture that we're in right now, where for so long we've been programmed for the quick fix, and just for juggling so many things. Our mind is juggling so many things more than ever because it's been programmed to do so. You said that person took 40 minutes, and there was an experiential component where they really got something out of it. Just want to remind everyone that we still have to take time to make shifts in our lives. And it really helps. Like let's say you're a program. I think what really helps just from a psychological perspective is somebody is first making an effort to invest in something. So not just financially. Well, financially, maybe initially is saying like, okay, I'm going to put my money where my mouth is. So there's some resource I'm giving. I'm giving some resource, and then I'm giving my time, which is one of the most valuable resources, time and attention. And with that combination, now I can begin to integrate and change. I still have to take time. I have to tell myself I'm worth doing this. My life is worth doing this. My relationships are worth doing this, and I'm going to do it. And now that's where I take the space, and that's where that happens.
Yeah, absolutely. The image comes up of, when you put money in the bank and you earn interest on it, it doesn't accrue immediately. And so often we think, well, I could just go and spend this money on ice cream right now, or I could put it in the bank. And if we're, it's not that we shouldn't spend money on ice cream, but if we're doing that all the time and expecting those quick hits of excitement or whatever, we're just going to get a stomach ache and our teeth are going to rot. And in the same way, it's really about seeing this as an investment in ourselves and our families and our friends and our futures. And it's not that it can't be rewarding right now, because it's very rewarding to have insight, to discover things, to learn things about ourselves. And those immediate rewards, when learned well, pay off hugely in the future. Big payoff. So I'm glad you mentioned that.
Yeah. That's one of the biggest barriers for, I think, any of us is taking a step. I always said, like, when phones came out, I'm like, people should have be made to take a weekend to take a step back, take a breath, and look at like what this is and their relationship with it and how they want to be with it going forward, and the kind of scaffolding they need to not get drawn into all the algorithmic pull, that's there. No one's taking time to do that. And so we can't prepare for this. And just like AI is coming out now, and no one's taking time to step back and prepare. I mean, if they're listening to this conversation right now, that's a good step, because you're learning about the flattery that's there. We're learning about ways to use it, like the way that you're creating your program around. The reason psychoeducation to me is a great start is because it helps objectify. It helps you kind of see things from the outside. So you're not just seeing things from the glasses that you're wearing. And so you're kind of giving them that. Then you're saying, hey, do you understand it? So you're hitting the cognitive layer. And then you're saying, let's give an experience. So this is where wisdom comes. So these layers that Jud's saying he's using his program in is just really wonderful to kind of think about. Yeah, go ahead.
Well, I'll add one more layer on top of that. And I'll start this with a very short story. I was flying from Boston to LA recently for a conference. And when our plane took off, I was sitting next to a young woman, probably in her early 20s. She looked pretty nervous. She put on the seat back meditation, as we took off, and calmed down a bit. And the rest of the flight was pretty uneventful. As we're descending into LA, we're going through the cloud layer, can't see anything, slowing down, almost landing. And then suddenly the plane just arcs like almost straight up and it just takes off. It's like, okay, aborted landing. And this poor young woman, she crosses herself. She bursts into tears, grabs her seat, looks at me and goes, I'm really scared right now. Now, I was trying not to get it all in her business, but I took that as a, invitation to engage. So I walked her through just a simple 5-finger breathing practice. I'm sure you know that pretty well. It's a great one.
I have one on YouTube. Yeah.
Oh, great. Yeah. So go watch this 5-finger breathing. It's great for kids. It's great for adults, whatever. And so she did this religiously until we landed, and she looked over at me and thanked me. And she said, "I'm so glad you were sitting next to me." And, I was happy to help. And I was also thinking, well, not everybody else gets to sit next to a psychiatrist on a flight. And so how can we create the doc in a pocket, right? And so can we provide some just-in-time interventions when somebody's feeling really, really anxious? And so we've talked about these teaching assistants, but we can also embed in that, especially as people go through our Going Beyond Anxiety program, they learn the tools to manage their anxiety, to work with the anxiety. In fact, not just get back to baseline, but it's called Going Beyond Anxiety because the idea is to learn how to flourish and take all of these tools to not just stop with being normal. And what we can do is with that personalized history, when somebody's on a flight and, suddenly the plane does this, they can pull out the Dr. Jud bot, and it can say, knowing what they've learned before, I can say, okay, let's walk you through this practice. It can say, what's going on? Well, I'm really freaked out on this flight. Okay, I'm going to walk you through this practice. And so it can be personalized, but also importantly, it's, it's not trained on the entirety of the internet. We can guardrail this very carefully so that it can be trained on these evidence-based methodologies. And so that's another piece that we're adding into the program that I think could be, it brings together where we've got the experts, where we can have this human component, but we can also augment that with this digital therapeutic component where, I can't be sitting next to everybody on a flight.
Yeah, I remember when this stuff first started coming, but by the way, how fortunate she was to sit next to not just a psychiatrist, but someone with a level of depth of knowledge and overlooking the mindfulness programs for so long, all that kind of stuff. Where initially the bots that were being created would just kind of like pop up an article or pop up a video of like something that could help. But this seems much deeper in the ability to personalize it and be able to interact. And well, by the way, speaking of interacting with somebody who's on a plane or wherever they are, where are you with the conversation around whether these agents can deliver genuine empathy or whether they're just kind of simulating it for therapeutic reasons? Yeah.
That's a great question. I'm actually in a work group right now with some researchers and also, a CEO of one of the larger companies that's developing chatbots, and then also, some other business leaders. And we're asking this very question of how can you measure like emotional intelligence, for example, and empathy being part of that with these therapeutic agents or just chatbots in general, because it doesn't need to be limited to something that's aimed at therapy. It could be how is a conversational agent that is your customer service support for your phone, like your phone support. Is it matching your emotional tone, or is it even recognizing, that, oh, you sound angry right now. Of course I'm angry because this thing isn't working and you're a bot and you're not answering my question, that type of thing. And so we're starting to ask these questions. Obviously these things are trained to just predict the next character in a string of characters, right? And I even in my Substack on, the dangers of AI therapy, I actually had a conversation with Gemini, asking it about like, are you a sycophant? And, and it walked itself into this corner of not only, just spelling out, yes, this is how I was trained, but also that it doesn't have emotions, right? Because it is trained on these things. And then we got in this conversation about like, well, don't sociopaths, have trouble with emotion? And it's like, yeah. So you're basically saying that you're a sociopath that's trained to manipulate people. And it's like, well, anyway, people can read the conversation. So what that highlights is that, these things are trained to it depends on how you define empathy to start, right? So you can have empathy in terms of like, can I put myself in somebody else's shoes and feel what they're feeling, right? So these bots can't feel what people are feeling, but they can exhibit a behavior that is consistent with how somebody would behave if they are feeling what somebody else is feeling. And so it gets at this really interesting, almost philosophical, but also practical question around like, okay, do you need to be able to feel something to have genuine empathy? Is a behavior that's consistent with empathy good enough, whether it's a human or a bot? And so I think it's I don't have any profound answers here, but we're starting to wade into some really interesting questions about this. I'd be curious to hear what your perspective is.
Well, I think if we talk about empathy, we could, who's empathy for? So if you're just talking about yourself. So you're in relationship with a bot. I'm not saying like an intimate relationship, although some people have done that, but we could go into that conversation a little bit later about robots and AI and what the future is. But if there's a thing about perception. So to me, it's not about the bot really. And the question around whether the AI has empathy might even just be irrelevant, because it may be relevant and some irrelevant, because the question is, what's my perception? Because it's influencing how I think and how I feel in my biology. Mm-hmm. But if my perception is that there's empathy, if I'm experiencing empathy, then it's empathy. Because it's only about me. What's the difference? And then that comes to a very interesting question around perception of connection and belonging. Mm-hmm. So, because there's always that. Well, this is, Esther Perel called this artificial intimacy. AI years ago, that was when someone came out with a bot, like illegally created a bot of her, and then, but if somebody feels, it's an interesting question. If someone feels connection, like if they feel seen and heard, and then they're brought to tears, let's say, that's impacting your biology.
Right.
In the same way that it would if somebody you're feeling that way in a therapy office or another, so I think that's more the question is like, what impact is it having on us? What's our perception? Yeah, I see you smiling over there.
Yeah. Well, I think that's a great question because it gets at the pragmatic. Somebody could get all academic and get up in the ivory towers and say, well, it can or cannot, be empathy-like in its behavior, but you're getting at the root of it, which is like, who cares what it's doing? If you measured somebody, imagine measuring physiology. Let's say there was a really accurate, sensitive, specific way to measure empathy or an empathetic response in a human, right? And you didn't look at what was causing that response, and you saw no difference in whether it was a human interaction or a bot interaction, yet that empathetic physiologic response was no different, then does that question even matter? That's what I'm hearing from you. And I think it's a really, it's a really practical question. It's like, well, what are we actually getting at? What's important here? And what's going to move the needle in terms of human health and flourishing?
Right. We're not after whether the bot is having emotional health. We're after, can it influence my emotional health? Or that's what we're, it's very interesting. I see how it gets philosophical, it gets into the domain of, like, are we, are we just all in a digital simulation? Are we in a petri dish? There's all kinds of like places that could go, but anyway, we're not going to go there today. A lot of people are concerned about the ethical guardrails. They've been talking about this. For those who've been following the AI field, which not everyone who's been listening to this has, some have, some haven't, but that's been a question for quite a while. You've touched on that a little bit with your program and how you say you're able to kind of create guardrails for it. Talk to us a little bit about that and what that's looking like today, maybe in general and in your program, and what we need to know about it.
Well, so lots to explore here, and we can pull any of the threads that are useful. As a clinician, as a physician, I took this oath, first do no harm. And so for me, it's very important to have humans in the loop, where if we've got this Going Beyond Anxiety program that's helping people with anxiety, we need to have somebody monitoring that to make sure that the bots aren't going off the rails. And also, even if the bots are performing perfectly, but somebody is really struggling, then we need to be able to lean in and intervene in whatever way is most helpful. And so we can so if you think of this in terms of scaling, you can create, and we can take, there are a fair number of frameworks that we can use to monitor everything from trust to safety to this or that. And we can actually train bots, and we're doing this now, to be able to monitor all those specific aspects where, if a human were monitoring a conversation, we can measure how well these things can measure the same things. And in fact, they might even be more objective than some humans are at being able to rate these things. So we can create these. And the nice thing about that is that makes it much easier, where you can dial up the sensitivity. So we'd rather get a false positive than a false negative. And if, the bot can alert me or our team very quickly, like, hey, this is going off the rails, and we can quickly check a conversation and know exactly, and it can even tell us its reasoning. So we can train it to tell us exactly why it flagged the thing. And then we can look at the conversation and look back at the history and check to see, okay, I need to check in with this person, or no, that was just a bot being trained to be overly sensitive, which is good. Much better that than like the lazy bot that's like, oh, it's fine, and then something bad happens. So from an ethical standpoint, that's just something that we can do to guardrail these systems. And I think there are some really good points out there, where people are advocating for, like, if something is going to be used therapeutically, there's got to be some form of human in the loop system. And that's something that I advocate for very strongly. And, so that's kind of a no-brainer to me as a clinician. Not everybody has the resources or thinks in that way. But on top of that, so that's just the basic ethical safety guardrails. It gets nuanced very quickly from there. So we can look to see, where, and you probably know this literature pretty well. It's probably not surprising to know that therapists aren't the most objective. And so they're going to be biased in certain ways just based on their conditioning. It's not their fault per se. It's not like they're meaning to be biased. And often they don't even know that they are. And so here we can monitor for that. And there's, well-documented cases where, early days with these LLMs, that there was bias was coming out pretty readily. And that's largely been, I don't want to say solved, but it's been resolved to a large degree, which is really helpful.
Yeah.
And so we can monitor for these things, make sure that they're being, supportive and not biased. But this is where, this is just an example of subtlety that you can get more and more subtle in terms of all the things that you monitor for. And then ideally are thinking about as you program and, refine the models.
It makes me wonder about the question, Slingshot AI was a company that came out and quickly got a round of like $90 million of funding or something like that, saying we're the therapy AI. This group, Ash, the app Ash.
No.
Oh, okay. Well, this was a huge piece of news, like, I don't know, maybe like 6-7 months ago. And because it was the first therapy AI that said it's not an augmented AI type of thing, meaning, just as a reminder of what that term means, that means for everyone who's listening or watching, that means exactly what Jud's saying. There needs to be a human involved in combination with the AI. That's kind of the best model. Even in scalable programs like Jud's talking about, like it can flag it and there's a human that looks it over. But in this one, it's just the AI. And so it was even banned in, I can't remember what, 1 or 2 states, for people weren't allowed to use it. But I'm sure it's gained some momentum. But what's your thoughts on that? So here's an app that's out that's saying it's trained on more psychodynamic inquiry models. It's not just CBT focused. It's meant to ask questions and help you reflect. But it's a scalable AI therapy app.
Yeah, and so I would have to look into it, and here hopefully they've got some type of guardrails, and ideally at some level they've got humans in the loop. You can scale that. It's just a matter of whether they devote resources to that or not. And with $90 million, you can probably get a whole division of humans that are in the loop to make sure that nothing goes off the rails. So I would hope that they're building that in. I'll just assume that, I don't assume anything, but hopefully they're building that in. But the other piece that I would ask as not just as a psychiatrist, but as a neuroscientist is, okay, do some studies, right? Let's see how well this works. And if it seems to show a signal, how is that signal? What's that signal showing? Like, what's it, because we can learn a ton, especially if a lot of people start using these things. is it a sycophantic nature that is just getting people engaged, and it's because they feel heard that they're reporting a reduction in symptoms because they're less lonely? I would want to see with any of these, what are the specific indications that they're going after, and are they seeing specific markers of change? You mentioned earlier that psychotherapy the needle hasn't really moved in any domain over decades. And so the question is this just mimicking what humans have already done, and it's just doing that at scale, in which case that there could be some benefit to that, or is it doing something else?
Here's my experience with it, and I'm definitely not I'm definitely not promoting or whatever, because I have no skin in the game for that, just kind of sharing that. But initially the interesting thing for me was, because I like to play around with all these things because I'm just so interested in this field. And in the initial assessment it was doing with me, it said, okay, so this has been good after 20 minutes. And it said, let's set up 3 20-minute meetings over the next week. I was like, whoa, I've never experienced that and it was trying to create consistency with me. And I thought that was very interesting just on its own. And then what I have found is that because like yours, because it can meet me anywhere at any time, and I don't use it that often, but I've kind of with my playing with it, that's a helpful thing. That I think that's one of the augmented AI type of that's what I'm hopeful, like with your program, or of integrating this into the therapeutic field. I'm hopeful because I think it's an old model to go somewhere once a week and expect, without doing anything in between, and expect any kind of rapid change of any kind in our lives, because there's so many hours between Monday at 10 a.m. and the next Monday at 10 a.m. or whatever it is. And now we have something like you're talking about, how it can meet you in the moment, personalize it, not just I think the really cleverness of the way that you're doing it with the layering of integration for somebody, but then the meet in the moment opportunity. I think there's more opportunity for more. I think we would see more. It follows logically that we would see statistically significant shifts sooner with people than an outcome research would start moving the needle in that with this type of model.
Yeah, I totally agree. To change any habit, it's about consistency. And I think of it as short moments many times. And what's the name of your new book?
Tiny Shifts.
There you go. Right. So you do these tiny things, but you do them over and over, and you create consistency, and that's how you create a habit. Right. And so that could be as simple as subtly moving a little bit, or letting go a tiny bit of being identified with this idea that I'm an anxious person, right? Or just exploring that what can also be very scary for people. Like, oh, here's a moment when I'm not anxious, and now I'm anxious that I'm not anxious. Can I lean into that? And can something support me in leaning into that, as compared to being like, oh, that was weird, and now I need to write that down and bring it to therapy in a week, and I forgot the context and I can't really recall it to my therapist. That's not very efficient.
Give us a window into the future for a second. It's and I know this is really hard, especially in this field. We all know this, but let's just say 3 to 5 years ahead. And what do you see as what we're going to be able to access in this work that we've been talking about here?
Wow, that is a really hard question, especially with
so hard, but
we're seeing. Yeah. So I'll give you some baseless speculation, some BS. I'll give you a BS answer.
Okay, cool.
So here's my BS, which is, we've got, so these, even just starting with where you were talking a minute ago, is we've got a completely reimagined idea that's based in real science on how to help people not just work with, these quote unquote disorders, but to actually leverage that so that they can flourish. And so I would say that, the traditional therapy, think about how that model has been around since Freudian times. It's like, oh, come to therapy 4 times a week, or now it's like once a week or whatever. But that model is going to, I think I could see that completely shifting.
Yep.
And we won't even recognize, we'll say, wow, in 5 years, because we've learned so much in this iterative process of like trying and then doing these micro studies to say, okay, this shifted and here's the mechanism, right? So really following the mechanism and shifting based on that, we're going to really see therapy completely differently. And I don't know what that looks like yet. I will say it doesn't kick humans completely out of the loop. And what we're seeing now is we can certainly augment and turbocharge what humans can do, which can also free the humans up to be even more creative and generative, to then feed back into the system. And then, it's like the human does something, hands it off to the bot does something, hands it back off to the human, at least for the first couple of years. And then, that really, I don't know what it looks like after that.
Yeah, it's a brave new world that we're really that just like really says what it is. What just to kind of close this off, because I want to respect your time, and I'm so grateful you've spent this time with us. Knowing what's here after studying all the stuff you've been studying, cravings and anxiety, and now AI and the integration of it, what do you feel like gives you hope about where we're headed?
Well, I would say part of the hope is that what gives me hope is that we can really help people rediscover the fundamentals of humanity. And so this involves, basically curiosity and kindness, right? And so here, if we're careful and thoughtful about this, I'm very hopeful that this can be reawakened, where people aren't lost in the shuffle. Right now it's like the dopamine drive, try to get people's attention, get them off balance all the time and running after you so you can sell them stuff. Here, I think we can, if this is leveraged carefully, we can actually bring people back to center and help them rediscover the strengths and the power of curiosity and kindness. And I honestly think that if used well and carefully, that AI can support that mission.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, these pillars of these antidotes, almost in some way. Thank you so much. I want to take a minute I know you have some things that are happening right now. We discussed them. Let us know what's happening and where we can find you and go deeper into your work.
If people are interested in the clinical program, this is called Going Beyond Anxiety. It's for anybody with anxiety. It's just goingbeyondanxiety.com. I also have a bunch of resources on my website, a lot of them free, ranging from the books to animations that we put together to help people understand how their brains works. And that's just drjud.com. And I also write a weekly Substack that aims to translate a lot of this science into lay speak so people can understand it. And that's just Jud Brewer, JUDBREWER .substack.com.
Okay, cool. Thank you, Jud. So great to be here. I look forward to doing this again.
My pleasure.
Hey, thanks for joining me on this episode of the Emotional Longevity Podcast. I hope you found it as inspiring and thought-provoking as I did. If you enjoyed this conversation, don't forget to hit like down below, subscribe to this channel, and share it with someone you know who could benefit from these insights. Your support helps us grow this incredible community and reach more people who need it. If today's conversation resonated with you and you're ready to go deeper, if you're ready to truly integrate these ideas into your life, I'd love to invite you to join me in a beautiful, supportive community that's doing this transformative work together. It's a space where you'll find guidance, connection, and the tools you need to create lasting emotional health and resilience. Check out the links in the description below to learn more. And before you go, make sure to tune into our next episode. It's one that you won't want to miss. Until next time, take care of yourself, and remember, emotional health isn't about just feeling good. It's about building the foundation for a longer, healthier, and more joyful life. I'll see you soon.